Welcome to the Friday, April 17th, 2026 episode of the On Iowa Politics podcast. This week, Iowa's Democratic U.S. Senate primary starts to warm up, just like the weather. A reminder that there is still a Republican U.S. Senate primary, and a national forecaster thinks Iowa's gubernatorial election is cooking. Pause for laughs. Hey everyone, I'm Erin Murphy. Yeah. I didn't say pause for pity laughs, just regular laughs were fine. Thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines bureau chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week, first of all, back in Cedar Rapids on the ones and twos is our producer Bailey Sheehan. Joining me for this week's episode are, I think you're back in Cedar Rapids, right? Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief Tom Barton.
Hey Erin.
From Davenport, we have Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Erin.
From across the state in Sioux City is Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal. Hello, Jared.
Hello.
We have our columnist in Cedar Rapids, Gazette columnist Althea Cole with us. Hello, Althea.
Good morning.
And Gazette columnist Todd Dorman. And again, if you're only listening, the reason I'm laughing is because of Todd's signature, which is a fantastic running gag. Hello this morning, Todd.
Hello. I wish I knew hello in Hungarian, but yeah. I didn't prepare that
I was just going to say you didn't do your homework. Come on, Todd.
No.
We're forgivable. We're recording Friday morning much earlier than we usually do, so you would have had time otherwise today to do that. So I'll take the hit for that one. All right. We're going to start this week in the wonderful world of political prognostication. And if this topic sounds mildly dated, we ask you kindly remember we did not tape a discussion last week, so you could listen to the latest On Iowa Politics podcast interview episode with former Governor Terry Branstad. By the way, if you haven't yet checked that out, we hope you do. Back on topic, the Cook Political Report made waves in Iowa by becoming the first national elections forecaster to rate Iowa's open seat gubernatorial election as a toss-up. We got a coin toss, a coin flip, according to Cook. Jared, let me start with you. Do elections ratings matter? No. I'm kidding. That's not my question. My actual question, Jared, is whether you think that's a well-reasoned move by Cook.
Well, they better be careful with their prognostication, because if they're too optimistic, they might get sued a little bit down the line for their prognosticating. So be careful there, Cook Political Report. It does seem plenty fair at this point, because the Republican primary has 5 people going in it, as we've talked about plenty of times. Nobody has fully separated themselves, even though Randy Feenstra has more money than anybody else and more connections. But of course, as there's been plenty of reporting the past week, he's taken a lot of shots from the other folks in the field, especially most recently with the ESAs. So obviously having a split field like that, while Rob Sand just gets to continue to, add to his campaign war chest, that is a benefit to him, I would say. And, if we get a a very murky primary on the Republican side, or maybe even a convention, that's a lot of conditionals I just gave, but that only benefits Rob Sand even more. So at this point, it seems fair to say that it's a toss-up, I think.
Well, and we'll find out, obviously, maybe at some point if we get any polling in this campaign, which the absence of that may be vaguely related to the reference you just made, Jared. Althea, I'm curious what you think of Cook calling Iowa's gubernatorial election a toss-up. What? Let me ask you, what is Iowa rated in the Cole Political Report?
Oh, the Cole Political Report.
Yeah.
You give me way too much credit here, Erin, because, yeah. Actually, maybe not. So the Cole Political Report actually called this race in late December of 2025. And let's see here. I believe the headline of that release was the Iowa Republicans will lose with Randy Feenstra. And that's still what the Cole Political Report is calling all of this. we're about a month and a half away from the June primary. And while it appears that Randy Feenstra is continuing toward the nomination, having the massive fundraising advantage, and the fact that the other four in the Republican gubernatorial primary have not set themselves out enough to really likely overtake him. So it will be Feenstra. That's my first prediction. And, again, the prediction I made at the end of December, and I want credit for this because I think I was the first to say that publicly at least, that Iowa Republicans will lose with Randy Feenstra as the nominee. The latest gaffe we were watching on, not this past week, but the previous week, when Feenstra appeared at the West Side Conservative Club in Polk County, he was asked his thoughts about education savings accounts, which is Governor Reynolds' signature education reform package, which allows the per pupil funding issued by the state of Iowa to follow a student to an accredited institution of their choice, including a charter school or a non-public, aka private school. And everybody in the GOP, including Feenstra, apparently, is definitely on board with ESAs and behind them. And yet when Feenstra was asked his thoughts, he spoke in support of them, and then he seemingly walked most of it back by saying, but private schools have to take all children. And that's a big Democratic talking point in opposition to ESAs. And I don't know why the presumed frontrunner of the Republican gubernatorial race would start adopting Democrat talking points, especially when they are antithetical to the purpose of education savings accounts themselves. So for my column this week, I am writing about that, exploring the argument of should ESAs or should private schools accepting ESAs be forced to take all kids? In an example that I don't share in the column, I have a family member in another state. He and his wife have 6 kids. The youngest is adopted. Genetically, he is the spawn of 2 exceedingly talented Division I athletes who lost their scholarships, lost their futures, and actually lost their freedom to drug use. And as a result, this family member's child has 2 things. Number 1, extraordinary athletic talent. And number 2, he's got some learning deficits that have proved problematic in the public school system. He has been he's been admitted to this school in his home state with an educational mission that is dedicated specifically to students with extraordinary athletic talent who need academic help in order to prepare them for the future that their talent is most likely preparing them for. And so should a school like that receive the entirety of their tuition from the state if the state practices education savings accounts? No, because tuition in many public schools is higher than what the per pupil amount is. But should a student be able to use that particular per pupil amount? And if so, should that school be forced to accept somebody with only mediocre athletic talent when that school's specific mission is to assist kids with superior athletic talent who need extra academic help? As I write in my column, private schools, charter schools, and public schools, they're not supposed to be identical. As a matter of fact, the only thing that is really equal between them is that they have an educational mission, that the money that follows them to the school is equal from the state. Given that they aren't specifically identical, my column looks at whether this argument that they should accept everybody is appropriate, and it argues that it does not. Now, Feenstra in his comment, what that really did was kind of set Democrats off and renew their argument, which is extremely frustrating to Republicans. The question is, where do you go from here? And will Feenstra recover from that? A, with his own party, who is not happy with those remarks, and B, will he make enough of a positive impression with voters? My opinion is that he will not, which means that if Randy Feenstra is indeed the nominee, Iowa Republicans are going to lose in November.
Erin, I also just wanted to jump in here real quick. I think if you zero in on what Republicans themselves are saying, it actually kind of helps to explain why Cook made the move. So I went to a GOP fundraising event and candidate forum in Clear Lake over the weekend. And at that Clear Lake fundraiser, there was a notable shift in tone. Kind of less confidence, more caution. So you had folks like Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Nag openly warning that the 2026 cycle is not going to be easy for Republicans, and acknowledging that Democrats are energized and that Rob Sand is a serious candidate. And it wasn't just elected officials. Republican activists in the room were pointing to very concrete concerns, especially Rob Sand's financial advantage. One longtime GOP operative noted how the race has steadily moved in ratings from solid Republican all the way now to toss-up, and tied that directly to Sand's fundraising edge and ability to compete statewide. There was also a lot of discussion about Sand's positioning. Republicans clearly see him as a candidate who's trying to run as a moderate. And, the fact that they're spending time warning about that, I think tells you that they think that message could resonate with Iowa voters. So when you step back, that's really kind of the key point. This isn't just outside analysts making a call in a vacuum. You're hearing Republicans on the ground acknowledge real vulnerabilities. Strong Democratic candidate, financial imbalance, and energized opposition. Now, that doesn't mean that Republicans are in trouble yet, but it does mean the race looks competitive. And when even party insiders are saying that out loud, it makes a toss-up rating look a lot less like kind of a hot take and more like a reflection of what things actually, or a reflection of where things actually stand right now.
Am I off at all in thinking that the comments that Feature made that he's taken a lot of backlash for? Obviously, they haven't played well at all in a Republican primary, but having the kind of position he did, isn't the worst thing to have in a general election, because it's a little more of a moderated sort of position on this that could play better for a broader demographic.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say to that, because I covered that West Side Conservative meeting and then was at the State House the rest of the day to hear the ripple effects and all the people reacting to that, including Republican legislators. And but in conversations with some people, including fellow reporters, that was one of the topics that kind of came out of that. Is it's not like it's and Althea has laid out arguments of why you wouldn't do that, and there are arguments for that, and Governor Reynolds addressed it the next day, I think it was, at a press conference she did, and so I'm not saying there's no arguments either way, but to your point, Jared, it's not like it's some extreme wackadoodle idea either, right? It's an interesting discussion point, an interesting topic, an interesting debate, and you could argue, which is sort of the point that Feenstra was making when he said it at the West Side Conservative Club, which is if you really believe in school choice, that means school choice for everyone, including parents who have kids with special needs who might want to take their kid to a private school. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting and good point to make, Jared. Now, like I said, there's a logistical and policy debate, and maybe even a little ideological to have there, but it's not like it's some just completely insane idea. It just doesn't maybe align, as Althea noted, with ideologically within the party.
Which, to me, then, if that was more intentional and more of a kind of modulating a position, and that maybe also sort of tips the hand in terms of how they feel about the primary and their chances of making it through.
Maybe. And to that, I would say, I wonder, Congressman Feenstra hasn't really said much about it since that first day. And so I think it'll be interesting the next time he's in front of a crowd or in reporters' microphones. Presume he'll get asked about it again. And I'll be interested to hear him clarify. Did he fully mean what he said, or was there some subtlety, and what he actually meant was something else, and maybe that's not exactly his position? As far as I know, we don't know that right now as we sit here Friday morning. So I'll be interested to hear that. the answer to that question, I guess. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to like the lay person, like the independent voter that's just like not super plugged into the private school issue may hear his comments and be like, yeah, you know, I want kids with special needs to be able to be accommodated at private schools. I mean, I think like you guys said, that probably has, you know, maybe a more general election audience.
Yeah. All right. A lot to talk about there, but we got to keep the ball rolling. We got so much more to talk about, including that other statewide election going on this year. The Democratic primary in Iowa's U.S. Senate campaign seems to be warming up a bit. Like I said at the top, recently candidates Zach Wahls and Josh Turek participated in a forum in Des Moines, and our Tom Barton was there. Tom, we talked about this a little bit afterwards. You and I have been talking about this. We've been so locked down in the Capitol for the session. We've been itching to get out there and see these candidates in these primary elections for the governor's race and the GOP side, and for you, the Democrats and the Senate side, and just kind of finally start to get a feel of how these campaigns are playing with the voters. So I'm curious if you felt like either of those two candidates won the room that night.
Yeah, I don't think you could say that there was a clear winner in the room. It felt much more like kind of a split decision, which honestly tracks with kind of where this primary is right now. Both if you look at the polling that's out there, and then also just talking to voters and activists on the ground. You know, I will say, though, that it seems like there was a little bit more enthusiasm for Josh Turek than there was for Zach Wahls. You know, both of them connected with the group, with the audience at the forum. You know, they both drew applause lines. You know, Zach Wahls clearly connected with a segment of voters, especially especially on his message regarding rooting out corruption in DC. He kicked off his Insiders over Outsiders statewide tour that he's going to be doing here in the next few weeks ahead of the primary election. And he kicked that off with a campaign event in Marshalltown earlier this week that I also went to. And so in Marshalltown, you know, I heard from attendees who, again, liked his focus on corruption, healthcare, water quality, and his willingness to what they see as, you know, putting Iowa first and, you know, standing up to Donald Trump. You know, he's getting validation from local endorsers who emphasize his ability to work across party lines and present kind of a generational time. But at the same time, there is some hesitation there. Voters aren't fully sold yet. And, you know, I heard that in conversations. People are still weighing whether he's the strongest general election candidate. They really like Josh Turek's background. You know, so even among undecided voters, kind of his big asset keeps coming up, that he's actually won in deep red territory in a state that's trended Republican. And the electability argument carries a lot of weight and has really played out in this race. And so I think what you saw at the forum, and again, in follow-up conversations with voters and activists, is, you know, it's shaping up to be a primary that I think is less about big policy differences and more about a fundamental question of who can actually win in November. You know, who is the strongest candidate to go up against Ashley Hinson, who is you know, very likely going to be the GOP nominee in this race. And so right now, voters are still sorting that out. And I think until one of these candidates kind of closes that argument decisively, you're probably going to keep seeing rooms like this engaged, interested, but not fully decided.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because, you know, as you noted in your story, that not a huge gap in policy between these two, right? And so Democratic primary voters aren't having to pick necessarily who the most aligns with them on policy. They're looking for who can beat Ashley Hinson. Right.
And there still are policy differences between the two, but they're more nuanced. And, you know, voters, I guess voters, for the most part, don't necessarily do nuance, right?
No.
And given the man, I want to be diplomatically correct and polite here. Given the tough go that Democrats have had in past election cycles in Iowa, again, that electability argument really is at the forefront. After cycle of losing ground here, which candidate again has the best chance of making up that ground? And I think more people are again looking to the general election, and I think less of them are, I guess, maybe considering things that you would typically or maybe normally see as concerns in a Democratic primary.
Yeah. And that was well diplomatically said. Well done, Tom. Todd, you wrote about that this recently. You think this Democratic primary finally getting a little heat? I'm curious what made you say that, and more importantly, do you think either candidate is catching fire right now?
Well, they're getting after each other. They're trying to carve out some differences with each other. That the primary hasn't progressed in any way that's surprising. I mean, Zach Wahls was the better known candidate among Democrats. People had good feelings about him. They liked him. They liked, how he became a public figure. They may like his leadership in the legislature. But now you've got Turek getting better known. And that it doesn't hurt that Vote Vets came in with a multi-million-dollar ad buy to introduce him to voters. And now that voters are starting to learn more about his track record, his personal story, his, that he won a red district, I think there are more people that are starting to think, well, Turek might be the better choice to go after Hinson. So I think that's where we're at. The candidates are, they're treading into this, into campaign finance, which I have long maintained that voters don't care. I wish they did. I really wish they did, but they don't. So Zach Wahls, accuses Turek of taking dark money from this group. He never mentions it's a vets group, which I think is pretty telling. But so he says that, this Vote Vets doesn't disclose its donors, so this is dark money, and Turek is benefiting from dark money. And then you find out that Wahls, worked at, what was the name of the group?
Next 50 Action, I believe.
Next 50 Action, which also does not disclose its donors. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole problem with the campaign finance argument. The pledge, I'm not going to take dark money. I'm not going to take corporate PAC money. Inevitably, someone who either gives you money or acts on your behalf is going to have taken dark money. They're going to have taken corporate PAC money. And then Republicans can just say you're a hypocrite. When people don't care, they just want you to get the money wherever you can so that you can win. I mean, that's the campaign finance they care about. Big piles to beat Republicans. So I would, if I could give advice to the campaigns, I'd say break off that line of attack, but they would never listen to me.
Yeah.
So
the other part of it too is the connection between the Vote Vets PAC and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York. And Wahls is kind of positioning himself again as this outsider and trying to portray Josh Turek as the establishment pick. He keeps talking about how there needs to be change within the Senate Democratic leadership. He's publicly criticized and called out Schumer and said that Schumer needs to step down because of Senate Republicans agreeing to open up the government, and the government shutdown over their fights about not extending the federal ACA enhanced healthcare tax subsidies, and again agreeing to fund the government without any assurances from Republicans that they would extend those healthcare subsidies that Wahls and others say are critically important to rural Iowans and will, have financial impacts in rural communities. And so his big thing is that, look, I have said that I will not support Chuck Schumer for leader, and that it's no coincidence that now this PAC that is, aligned with Schumer and Senate Democrats is now endorsing my primary opponent, who has not taken that same stance. And for a segment of Iowa Democrats, I think that argument resonates. I think that there is just broadly among the electorate unhappiness with leadership in both parties. And so I think Wahls is trying to play off of that and say, and paint himself as more of the independent, right? I'm not tied to, I'm not beholden to Chuck Schumer or these super PACs out there that are trying to spend on my behalf. I'm, again, the true outsider. I mean, take that for what it's worth. We asked Zach Wahls after that candidate forum, did you go to Chuck Schumer? Did you go out to DC? Did you approach the Senate Majority Fund, the campaign arm of Senate Democrats, and did you ask them for their support? Did you want their support? And he kind of sidestepped the issue, sidestepped the question. But he's trying to say that again, we need generational change and new leadership and younger leaders to represent this party going forward.
And I mean, but again, this is and you're right, it is important to some voters, but again, it's kind of an inside baseball argument. I mean, you're talking about dark money, you're talking about who's going to be Democratic leader, who's going to support them. I mean, you got to win before you can support anybody for leader, and it may not be majority leader, it may be the minority again. So I just, I don't know if this stuff resonates.
Todd, tell me what you think of this. It feels like one of those issues where if you ask people in a vacuum, how do you feel about dark money? God, yeah, I hate dark money. I'm totally with you. I want it out of elections. Is that how you're going to choose a candidate? No, absolutely not. It's not as I like to use, a pull the lever voting issue. They're going to pick their candidate for different reasons.
Yeah, and I don't think, as people learn about Turek, I don't think he's going to strike them as a weak sort of puppet that's being, the strings are being held by Chuck Schumer. Right. I just think that's a sort of a kind of a ridiculous notion. But I mean, it's a primary. You use what you can, and if you don't have a ton of differences on issues, you kind of get mired in this sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's fair. If it's the one place where maybe you see daylight between yourself and another candidate, it's a way to draw a contrast. Yeah.
A good question for Wahls is, will you refuse any help from the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee if you win the Democratic nomination? Will you just go ahead.
No, sorry. We asked him that question as well after the forum, and forgive me. It's been a little over a week ago, and I have to go back and check my notes. But I mean, essentially, what he said is, look, if they want to get involved in this race, and spend on my behalf after the primary, if I get the nomination, so be it. But I think it essentially said that he's not going to actively, I guess, seek that out or go after it. Which is,
yeah. If they think they got a chance to win the seat, he's not going to have to ask for anything. It's just going to,
it's going to be there. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't think these arguments sort of move the needle. I think it's going to come down to who folks are most comfortable with, as Tom said, who's going to win the general election. So
I'm sorry. I do remember what his response is. He says, if they want to come in and spin in the race, so be it. But that is not going to change my position on Chuck Schumer, and I stand firm and, will not support him.
There you go. All right. Before we wrap. We still got more to talk about in this very same U.S. Senate election on the Republican primary side. I'll bet some of you forgot there's a Republican primary, didn't you? GOP candidate Jim Carlin recently campaigned in Scott County alongside local state house candidates, and our Sarah Watson was there. Carlin, as a reminder, is seeking the party's nomination in this U.S. Senate election. It's a nomination that, frankly, in about 99.99% likelihood, will go to Ashley Hinson in about a month and a half. But Carlin has not yet given up the good fight. Sarah, tell us about the event that you covered.
Yeah, so speaking about money arguments,
Yeah.
Jim Carlin is a very big advocate for doing away with super PACs and is critical of the money that Ashley Hinson has raised. So yeah, just as a reminder, Carlin's a lawyer and former state lawmaker from Sioux City. He is at a significant fundraising disadvantage to Ashley Hinson. He raised about $94,000 in 2025, and Hinson raised about $3.9 million in that same time period. So significantly out fundraised. He was at the Circle Tap in Davenport for a meet and greet. Pretty small numbers of people, but he had a event earlier in the day that had more attendance. But his general campaign messages were that Americans are being taxed too much and corporations have too much influence in politics. He pointed to Ashley Hinson's acceptance of funds from Bruce Rastetter, who is a supporter of carbon capture pipelines, and gives that as an example of money and corporations' influence in politics. And so he supports, like I said, abolishing super PACs. He criticized Hinson's support for funding for Ukraine. He says that as the economy is struggling, that money should not be going, out of the country. He said his priorities would be to keep the dollar strong, audit the Federal Reserve, finish the border wall between the U.S. and Mexico, pass the SAVE Act, which would make changes to voting in the U.S., including providing proof of citizenship to register to vote. He pointed to some of his work on bills in the state legislature that later became law, including working on what supporters call the heartbeat bill, an active shooter training bill, and what he called, quote, fighting radical gender ideology, unquote. So it's just a little taste of what happened there.
Yeah, and he was with helping out state house candidates. He said Tuesday, and the crowd. I was curious. You said not a whole lot of people there. I was just curious how big an event this was.
It was pretty small. Yeah, there was. He spoke earlier in the day at a Republican women's event, and it sounds like there were more people at that event. That was around lunchtime, and then this was in the afternoon meet and greet with a couple of state house candidates. It was, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 people there.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know if they didn't have air conditioning running, but it was it was a hot day, and it was really, really warm in the room.
Oh, no.
Everybody was sweating. And at one point, Jim Carlin was like, I support fully funding air conditioning. So it's actually kind of funny.
A cause we can all get behind in this June primary election in Iowa. Oh, that's fantastic. I love those little things. That's great. It sounds like a kid running for class president promising pizza every day for school lunch. That's terrific. What did the crowd engage with him at all, Sarah? Or did he just kind of talk and say his piece and that was it?
Yeah, he pretty much just said his piece because there were 3 state legislative candidates, and then David Pouch also spoke, who was candidate for the 1st district.
Mm-hmm.
So that took up a good amount of time, and then he had to leave. So
in the other Republican congressional primary that some of us may have forgot was happening, that David Pouch is running against Marinette Miller Meeks again. All right. Interesting stuff. That's going to do it for this week's episode. We appreciate you all listening. If you're not already, subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you can catch us every week as well on your preferred Gazette or Lean newspaper website. Now that you listen to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the daily On Iowa Politics newsletter, which brings our team's outstanding coverage right to your inbox. you can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. And links to all those stories that we discussed today can be found on the podcast page on all those websites or in the YouTube comments. And also a quick brief programming note, if you're in the Cedar Rapids area next Thursday for Pints and Politics, which I always recommend you attend, but this week there may be an interloper swooping in from Des Moines and helping out with the event's festivities. So if you're around next Thursday, stop on by. For Tom Barton, Sarah Watson, Jared McNett, Althea Cole, Todd Dorman, and our producer Bailey Sheehan, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.